I was staring at my HOA bill when I noticed the elevator maintenance fee had jumped from $85 to $230 per month, and something in my gut told me this wasn't right. My name is Marcus Chen, and I had been living in the Riverside Towers condominiums in downtown Portland, Oregon, for about 3 years. The building was a 12-story mid-rise. Structure built in the late 90s, nothing. Fancy but decent enough for a software engineer like me who valued location over luxury. The HOA had always been managed by a woman named Patricia Henshaw, a 52-year-old former real estate agent who treated the homeowner association like her personal kingdom. Patricia had that classic Karen haircut, the asymmetrical bob that screamed entitlement from a mile away, and she wore it like a crown. I had mostly avoided dealing with Patricia directly until that Tuesday morning in March when I opened my quarterly HOA statement and saw the massive increase. The breakdown listed elevator maintenance as a separate line item, which was new. Previously, it had been bundled into general building maintenance. Now it was itemized and the cost had nearly tripled. I walked down to the mailroom on the first floor, my statement still in hand, and ran into my neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski. She was 73, lived on the 8th PROD, elevator because of her arthritis. "Marcus, have you seen this bill?" she asked, waving an identical statement at me. Her hands were shaking slightly, though whether from anger or her condition I could not tell. "Just looked at it. The elevator maintenance seems excessive," I said. "Excessive, it's robbery. I'm on a fixed income. I can't afford an extra $145 every month," Mrs. Kowalski said, her voice rising. "And for what? The elevator breaks down at least twice a month. If they're doing all this maintenance, why is it always out of order?" She had a point. I had been stuck taking the stairs numerous times over the past few months when the elevator was tagged with an out-of-order sign. For me, climbing 7 flights was annoying. For residents like Mrs. Kowalski, it was nearly impossible. "Have you contacted Patricia about it?" I asked. Mrs. Kowalski snorted. "I tried. She sent me an email saying the costs have gone up industry-wide and that we should be grateful the building is being properly maintained." Grateful? When I can barely get to my own apartment half the time. I felt my jaw tighten. I had dealt with enough corporate nonsense in my day job to recognize the smell of something fishy. "Let me look into it," I told her. That evening, I drafted a formal email to Patricia requesting detailed documentation of the elevator maintenance expenses. I kept it polite but firm, citing the HOA bylaws that required transparent accounting of all fees. According to Oregon Patricials, and our specific HOA still had one documents, any homeowner had the right to review financial records with reasonable notice. Patricia responded within an hour, which surprised me. Her email was terse. "Mr. Chen, the elevator maintenance is being handled by a certified contractor. All fees are legitimate and necessary. You may submit them in writing for review at the next board meeting in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. That was the first red flag. There was no legitimate reason to make me wait that long for basic financial documentation. I replied immediately, this time copying the entire HOA board, which consisted of Patricia and 2 other members. Donald Murray, a retired accountant who lived on the 10th floor, and Susan Rodriguez, a nurse who worked night shifts and whom I had rarely seen at any HOA meetings. Revised STATUTES, with the SECTION 94POINT 670 deputies. HOA I panned and Financide walked over records within 10 business days of my request. I am specifically requesting copies of all invoices, contracts, and service records related to elevator maintenance for the past 12 months. Please advise when these documents will be available. I hit send and waited. 2 days passed without a response. On the third day, I received a voicemail from Patricia. Her voice dripped with barely concealed irritation. Mr. Chen, this is Patricia Henshaw. Your request has been noted, but the documents you're asking for are currently being organized. Our management company handles the billing and I need to coordinate with them. This will take some time. I'll be in touch. Management company. That was news to me. As far as I knew, Patricia managed everything directly. I had never heard mention of an outside management company in the 3 years I had lived here. I decided to do some digging on my own. The building's maintenance room was on the ground floor, accessible through a door next to the parking garage entrance. I had seen the building's maintenance guy, a friendly man in his 60s named Ray, going in and out of there regularly. Ray was employed directly by the HOA to handle basic repairs, light bulbs, plumbing issues, and general upkeep. I found Ray on Thursday afternoon as he was replacing a light fixture in the lobby. "Hey Ray, got a minute?" I asked. "Sure thing, Marcus, what's up?" He climbed down from his ladder and wiped his hands on his work pants. "Question about the elevators. Have we had any major maintenance done recently? New parts, upgrades, anything like that?" Ray frowned and scratched his chin. "Not that I know of. I mean, I'm here 5 days a week, and I haven't seen any elevator company come through. We had a guy from the manufacturer, ThyssenKrupp, come out about 4 months ago when the elevator got stuck between floors, but that was just a service call. Took him maybe 2 hours to fix a sensor issue. What about monthly maintenance? Inspections, that kind of thing? There's supposed to be monthly inspections, yeah, required by the city. But honestly, I haven't seen anyone doing them regularly. Sometimes the elevator just breaks down and then Patricia calls someone to fix it. But routine maintenance." He shook his head. "Not that I've seen." This was getting interesting. "Do you know who Patricia calls when there's a problem?" "Some company called Superior Elevator Services, I think. I've seen their invoices on Patricia's desk once or twice when I've had to drop off receipts for supplies." "Thanks, Ray, this is helpful." He gave me a concerned look. "Everything okay? You're not in some kind of trouble with the HOA, are you?" "No trouble, just trying to understand where my money is going." That weekend, I did more research. I looked up Superior Elevator Services online and found a basic website with a Portland address and phone number. The site looked professional enough, but something about it felt off. The testimonials were generic. There were no specific details about the company's history. And when I checked the Oregon Secretary of State Business Registry, I found that Superior Elevator Services had been registered only 18 months ago. The registered agent for the company was listed as Brian Henshaw. Henshaw, that could not be a coincidence. I did a quick social media search and found that Brian Henshaw was Patricia's husband. His LinkedIn profile listed him as Operations Manager at Superior Elevator Services. My heart started racing. This was more than just inflated fees. This looked like a potential conflict of interest at best and fraud at worst. Patricia was billing the HOA for elevator maintenance, performed by a company her husband operated. That alone was not necessarily illegal, but it was certainly unethical if it had not been properly disclosed, and it raised serious questions about whether the services were actually being performed. I needed proof. I sent another email to Patricia, this time specifically requesting the service logs for the elevator maintenance, not just the invoices. I wanted to see documented evidence that the work was actually being done. Patricia's response came on Monday morning. "Mr. Chen, I have forwarded your request to our management company. They will compile the records and make them available for your review. Please allow adequate time for this process." I was done being patient. I contacted the Oregon Department of Consumer and Business Services, which oversees HOA disputes in the state, and filed a formal complaint. I also reached out to Donald Murray, the retired accountant on the HOA board, and asked if we could meet for coffee. Donald agreed to meet me that Wednesday at a small cafe near the building. He was in his late 60s, with silver hair and the careful, methodical manner of someone who had spent his career dealing with numbers. "I appreciate you reaching out," Donald said after we had ordered. "I've been on the board for 2 years, and I'll be honest with you, Marcus, I've had my own concerns about how things are being run." "What kind of concerns?" He sighed. "Patricia handles most of the day-to-day operations, and she's very protective of the financial information. When I've asked to review the books, she always provides summaries rather than detailed records. As a board member, I should have full access to everything, but she makes it difficult. Says she doesn't want to burden me with paperwork, that she has it all under control." "Have you ever heard of Superior Elevator Services?" Donald's expression shifted. "Yes, actually. In the August, company we've been using for elevator work. Patricia brought them in about a year and a half ago, said they offered better rates than the previous contractor." "Did you know that Superior Elevator Services is owned by Patricia's husband?" The color drained from Donald's face. "What?" I showed him the business registration documents on my phone. He stared at them for a long moment. "This is a serious conflict of interest," he said quietly. "This should have been disclosed to the board and put to a vote. If she's been approving payments to a company she and her husband own without proper disclosure, that's a violation of her fiduciary duty." "I think it's worse than that," I said. "I don't think the maintenance is actually being done. I've talked to Ray, our maintenance guy, and he says he hasn't seen any regular elevator maintenance in months. The elevator keeps breaking down, which doesn't make sense if it's being properly maintained." Donald set down his coffee cup with a heavy hand. "We need to see those service logs." "Patricia keeps stalling. I've requested them multiple times and she keeps saying they're being compiled." "She can't stall the board. I'm calling an emergency board meeting." "As a board member, I have that right. We'll require her to produce all financial records related to the elevator maintenance, including contracts, invoices, and service logs. If she refuses, we'll have grounds to suspend her authority." The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening in the building's community room. Patricia was furious. She sent a building-wide email claiming that certain residents were causing unnecessary drama and wasting the board's time with frivolous requests. I was not the only one who showed up. Mrs. Kowalski was there, along with at least 20 other residents who had concerns about the increased fees. The community room was packed. Patricia sat at the front table with Donald and Susan Rodriguez, who looked uncomfortable and confused about what was happening. Anger, IHANDCLA asked SPED in front of her on the table. Donald called the meeting to order. "We're here tonight to address concerns raised by multiple residents regarding the elevator maintenance fees. Mr. Chen has made a formal request for documentation, which is his right under Oregon law and our HOA bylaws. Patricia, can you please provide the requested documents?" Patricia's smile was thin and cold. "As I've explained to Mr. Chen multiple times, the documents are being compiled by our management company. These things take time." "What management company?" Donald asked. "I'm not aware that we've hired an outside management company. That would require board approval." Patricia's eyes flashed. "It's a figure of speech, Donald. I handle the management, obviously. What I mean is that the invoices and records are stored in multiple formats, and it takes time to organize them properly." "How much time?" I asked from the audience. "It's been 2 weeks since my initial request. Oregon law requires you to provide access to records within 10 business days. I don't appreciate your tone, Mr. Chen, Patricia snapped. I've been managing this HOA for 6 years, and I've never had complaints until now. Maybe if you spent less time making accusations and more time trusting the people who actually know how to run a building, we wouldn't be wasting everyone's time. It's not an accusation to ask for documentation of how my HOA fees are being spent, I replied, keeping my voice level. It's basic transparency. Donald cleared his throat. Patricia, I'm going to make this simple. I'm requesting, as a board member, immediate access to all financial records related to elevator maintenance, not summaries. The actual invoices, contracts, and service logs, I want to see them within 48 hours. Susan Rodriguez, who had been silent until now, spoke up. I'd like to see them too. I didn't know our elevator fees had increased so much. I work nights, so I haven't been available for most meetings, but this seems like something the full board should have reviewed. Patricia looked between them, her jaw working. Fine, I'll provide the invoices. But I want it noted that this witch hunt is creating a hostile environment and interfering with my ability to manage this building effectively. Noted, Donald said dryly. 48 hours, Patricia. I'll expect the documents delivered to my unit and to Susan's unit by Thursday evening. The meeting adjourned and residents filed out, many of them stopping to thank me for raising the issue. Mrs. Kowalski squeezed my hand. Give them hell, Marcus, she whispered. Thursday evening arrived and I ran into Donald in the lobby. He was carrying a manila folder and looked grim. Did she provide the documents? I asked. She provided invoices, lots of invoices. But that's it. No service logs, no maintenance records, no documentation of what work was actually performed, just bills from Superior Elevator Services. Can I see them? They J. Ewell T. Donald's Arment in Apartment, IINVOICE, xink across there his going to vnulng RI's table. There were dozens of them. I've got MONTHI. Each invoice listed vague descriptions. Monthly maintenance service elevator system, safety inspection and adjustment, preventive maintenance and testing. Month, overheading toward my EIGHTEN. Months, that was over $36,000 paid to Superior Elevator Services. These could mean anything or nothing, Donald said. There's no detail about what was actually done. No list of parts replaced, no time logs, no technician's signatures. These are essentially just requests for payment, and Patricia approved all of them. She's the one who signs the checks. She has signing authority up to $5,000 per transaction without board approval. Anything over that requires 2 board signatures. I pulled out my phone and opened the notes I had been keeping. Ray told me he hasn't seen any regular maintenance crew. The only time elevator technicians show up is when something breaks. I started keeping track 3 weeks ago, and the elevator has been out of order 5 times. If we're paying $2,000 a month for maintenance, why is the elevator constantly breaking? Donald rubbed his face. We need the service logs. Without them, we can't prove whether the work was done or not. Patricia knows that. What if they don't exist? I asked. What if there are no service logs because no service was actually performed? Then we're looking at fraud, but we need to prove it. I thought for a moment. The elevator maintenance is supposed to be documented for safety reasons, right? The city requires inspections. Yes. Commercial and residential elevators in Portland must be inspected at least annually by a certified inspector. The inspection reports are filed with the city. Can we access those reports? Donald's eyes lit up. Yes, they're public records. The next morning, I took a long lunch break and went to the Portland Bureau Development Services office downtown. I requested copies of all elevator inspection reports for Riverside Towers for the past 2 years. The clerk, a bored-looking young man with headphones around his neck, typed into his computer and frowned. "We have one inspection report on file for your building, dated 14 months ago. The elevator passed inspection at that time. Only one, aren't they supposed to be done annually? At minimum, yes. But we don't automatically know if an inspection hasn't been done unless there's a complaint. Building owners and HOAs are responsible for ensuring compliance. If they don't file a report, it usually doesn't get flagged unless someone reports a problem or there's an incident. So we're overdue for an inspection. By a couple of months, yeah. You might want to have that done." He printed out the inspection report from 14 months ago. It showed that the elevator had passed with no major issues, just a recommendation to replace some worn cables within the next year. I thanked him and left. This was more ammunition. If we were paying for monthly maintenance, why had we not had a city inspection in over a year? And why had the recommended cable replacement apparently not been done? Back at my apartment, I compiled everything I had. The business registration showing Brian Henshaw's connection to Superior Elevator Services, raised testimony about the lack of maintenance activity, the vague invoices with no supporting documentation, the absence of recent city inspections, and the elevator's frequent breakdowns. I also did something else. I called Superior Elevator Services directly. A man answered on the third ring. "Superior Elevator Services, this is Brian." "Hi Brian, my name is Marcus Chen. I live at Riverside Towers and I had some questions about the maintenance service you provide for our elevator." "Oh sure, what can I help you with?" His voice was friendly, unsuspecting. "I'm trying to understand what the monthly maintenance includes. Can you walk me through what your technicians do during a typical service visit?" There was a pause. "Well, you know, standard stuff. We check the cables, test the safety systems, lubricate the mechanisms, make sure everything is running smoothly." "How long does a typical monthly service take?" Another pause, longer this time. "Depends on what we find, usually a few hours. And you do this every month at our building?" "That's what the contract is for, yeah, monthly service." "What time of day do your technicians usually come? I'm home a lot working remotely, and I don't think I've ever seen your trucks." The friendliness was leaving his voice. "I'd have to check the schedule. The technicians coordinate directly with the building manager. Is there a problem?" "No problem, I'm just trying to get some information." "Do you keep service logs that document what work is performed each visit?" "Of course, that's all standard. Look, if you have concerns, you should talk to Patricia. She's our contact for your building." "I'm sure she is. Thanks for your time, Brian." I hung up. He had confirmed they were supposed to be doing monthly service and keeping logs. Now I just needed to get my hands on those logs. I decided to try a different approach. I sent an email directly to Superior Elevator Services, using the contact form on their website, posing as a board member requesting copies of all service logs for Riverside Towers for the past 18 months. The response came the next day from Brian Henshaw's email address. "Please coordinate all requests through your HOA manager, Patricia Henshaw. All documentation is provided to her directly as outlined in our service agreement." Of course, they were not going to give me anything without going through Patricia. I was running out of patience. I called Donald and Susan and asked them to meet with me. We gathered in Susan's apartment that evening. "We're being stonewalled," I told them. "Patricia won't provide the service logs, and Superior Elevator Services won't release them without her approval. We need to compel them to produce the documents." Susan, who had been mostly quiet through all of this, spoke up. "As board members, Donald and I can vote to require her to produce the documents under threat of removal." If she's refusing to comply with legitimate requests for financial records, that's grounds for termination as HOA manager. Donald nodded. I agree, but we need to be prepared for this to get ugly. If there's actual fraud involved, Patricia is going to fight back hard. Let her fight, I said. We have enough evidence of impropriety to justify a full investigation. At minimum, she failed to disclose her husband's ownership of the company we're paying tens of thousands of dollars to. That alone is a serious breach of fiduciary duty. We drafted a formal letter that evening, signed by Donald and Susan as board members, requiring Patricia to produce all service logs for Superior Elevator Services within 72 hours or face an immediate vote on her termination as HOA manager. We also included a requirement for her to disclose any financial relationships between herself, her family members, and any vendors contracted by the HOA. The letter was hand-delivered to Patricia's unit the next morning. I was not there for that, but Donald told me later that Patricia had opened the door, read the letter, and slammed the door without saying a word. What happened next, I did not expect. That afternoon, Henshaw. The letter accused me of harassment, defamation, and creating a hostile environment. It demanded that I cease all communications regarding HOA business and threatened legal action if I continued to spread false allegations. I took the letter to a real estate attorney named Jennifer Wu, whose office was in the Pearl District. Jennifer was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, and had a reputation for handling HOA disputes. This is an intimidation tactic, Jennifer said after reviewing the letter and the evidence I had compiled. She's trying to scare you into backing off. But she's made a mistake by putting this in writing, because now we have documentation that she's attempting to prevent a homeowner from exercising their legal right to review HOA records. What should I do? First, don't stop what you're doing. You're well within your rights. Second, I'm going to respond to her attorney on your behalf, making it clear that you're engaged in protected activity and that any retaliation will result in legal action against her and the HOA. Third, we're going to file a formal complaint with the Oregon Department of Justice, because this is starting to look like possible criminal fraud, not just a civil HOA dispute. Jennifer drafted a response letter that was far more threatening than anything Patricia's lawyer had sent me. She also helped me file a complaint with the Dodge's Consumer Protection Division, outlining the evidence of potential fraud and self-dealing. Things escalated quickly after that. Patricia sent a building-wide email claiming that I was attempting to disrupt HOA operations and that all of my allegations were baseless. She said that the elevator maintenance was properly documented and that she had offered to provide records, but that I was being unreasonable in my demands. Several residents contacted me after that email. Some were supportive, saying they trusted my instincts and wanted to know the truth. Others were hostile, saying I was causing problems and running up legal fees that would eventually fall on all homeowners. The tension in the building became palpable. People chose sides. I started getting dirty looks in the elevator from certain residents. Someone left a nasty note on my door accusing me of being a troublemaker, but I also had allies. Mrs. Kowalski organized a group of about 15 residents who were all concerned about the increased fees and the lack of transparency. We started meeting weekly in the community room to discuss strategy and share information. The 72-hour deadline for Patricia to produce the service logs came and went. She did not provide them. Instead, her attorney sent another letter claiming that the service logs were proprietary. Business records belonging to Superior Elevator Services, and that the HOA had no right to demand them. That argument did not hold water. The HOA had every right to documentation of services it was paying for. Donald and Susan called for an emergency board vote, and despite Patricia's objections, they voted 2-1 to suspend her authority to approve any further payments to Superior Elevator Services, until the service logs were produced and verified. Patricia was livid. She showed up at Donald's door at 8 in the morning the day after the vote, screaming about betrayal and incompetence. Donald, to his credit, shut the door and called building security. We did not have traditional security, but Reicher were a Wymet stepped up. The Niprid to palm down or hik matu was Udmine call the police. Patricia left, but not before shouting threats about suing everyone involved. With Patricia's payment authority suspended, I took the next step. I contacted ThyssenKrupp, the actual manufacturer of our elevator, and requested a full inspection and service evaluation. I explained the situation, and they agreed to send a technician. The technician, a woman named Linda who had been servicing elevators for 20 years, arrived 3 days later. Ray let her into the maintenance room and gave her access to the elevator machinery. I met with Linda after her inspection. She was holding a clipboard and shaking her head. "Mr. Chen, I'm going to be honest with you, this elevator has not been properly maintained. The cables are worn and should have been replaced months ago. The brake pads are at maybe 30%, the guide rails need lubrication. There's dust and debris in the machinery that suggests no one has cleaned this system in at least a year, maybe longer." My stomach dropped. "Is it safe? It's functioning, but it's not up to code." If an inspector saw this, you would probably fail inspection and have to take the elevator out of service until repairs are made. I'm frankly surprised it hasn't had more serious problems. "How much would it cost to bring it up to proper standards?" She consulted her notes. "Parts and labor, you're looking at around $4,000. That includes new cables, brake pads, a full cleaning and lubrication, and fixing a few sensors that are starting to fail." $4,000. We had paid Superior Elevator Services over $36,000 over the past 18 months, and the elevator needed $4,000 in work to be brought up to code. The math was damning. "Can you provide me with a written report of your findings?" I asked. "Absolutely, I'll have it to you by tomorrow." Linda's report was devastating. It documented every deficiency she had found and included photographs of the worn cables, dirty machinery, and deteriorating brake pads. She noted that the condition of the elevator was inconsistent with regular professional maintenance, and that the wear patterns suggested minimal servicing over an extended period. I forwarded the report to Donald, Susan, Jennifer, my attorney, and the Oregon Department of Justice investigator who had been assigned to my complaint. The DOJ investigator, a man named Robert Preston, called me 2 days later. "Mr. Chen, based on the evidence you've provided, we're opening a formal investigation into possible theft and fraud. I need you to compile all the documentation you have and send it to my office. We're also going to request bank records from the HOA to verify the payments made to Superior Elevator Services." "What happens now?" I asked. "We investigate. If we find evidence of criminal activity, we'll refer the case to the district attorney's office for potential prosecution. This could take a few months, but based on what I'm seeing, you've built a strong case." Over the following weeks, things began to unravel for Patricia. The DOJ subpoenaed financial records from both the HOA and Superior Elevator Services. They also interviewed Brian Henshaw, who apparently became very nervous when investigators showed up at his door. Through the grapevine, I heard that Brian had admitted under questioning that Superior Elevator Services had performed only occasional service calls at Riverside Towers, not monthly maintenance. He claimed Patricia had told him to invoice monthly anyway, saying it was part of their billing structure. Patricia's attorney stopped returning calls. The other residents who had been defending Patricia grew quieter as more information came out. In early May, nearly 2 months after I had first noticed the billing discrepancy, Patricia and Brian Henshaw were arrested. The charges were theft in the first degree and aggravated theft, both felonies under Oregon law. According to the arrest warrants, they had fraudulently billed the HOA for services that were never performed, stealing over $30,000. The arrest made the local news. I watched the report from my living room as Patricia was led out of the building in handcuffs, her face hidden behind her hair, photographers snapping pictures. It was surreal. The Multnomah County District Attorney's Office moved quickly. Patricia and Brian were both offered plea deals, which they accepted rather than face trial. Patricia pleaded guilty to aggravated theft and was sentenced to 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. She was also ordered to repay the full amount stolen, plus interest and penalties. Brian received a similar sentence, though his attorney argued he had been following his wife's direction. The judge was not sympathetic, noting that Brian had knowingly participated in the fraud and had benefited financially from it. The HOA board was restructured. Patricia was obviously removed, and Donald took over as president. Susan stepped into a more active role as treasurer, and we elected 3 new board members, including Mrs. Kowalski, who was eager to ensure nothing like this ever happened again. One of our first acts was to hire a legitimate property management company with proper oversight and transparent accounting. We also contracted with ThyssenKrupp to perform the necessary repairs and establish a real monthly maintenance schedule. The elevator was fixed within 2 weeks, and it ran smoothly for the first time in over a year. Mrs. Kowalski sent me a thank you card with a note that said, "I can finally get to my apartment without wondering if I'll be trapped or stranded. Thank you for caring enough to ask questions." The HOA also filed a civil lawsuit against Patricia and Brian to recover the stolen funds. Their assets were seized, including their condo in our building, which was sold to help repay the debt. It took almost a year, but we eventually recovered most of the money, which was distributed back to homeowners as a credit against future HOA fees. I learned a lot through that experience. I learned that asking questions is not causing trouble, even when people try to make you feel that way. I learned that transparency is not optional in organizations that handle other people's money. And I learned that sometimes, when something does not seem right, it is because it is not right. The blank service logs that Patricia could never produce were blank because they did not exist. The maintenance that we were being charged for never happened. It was that simple and that infuriating. In the months that followed, I became more involved in the HOA. I joined the board myself after one of the new members stepped down due to work commitments. I helped implement new policies requiring multiple bid proposals for any contract over a certain amount, mandatory disclosure of any potential conflicts of interest, and quarterly financial reports made available to all homeowners. Some people thought I was being overly cautious, but most residents appreciated the increased transparency. We had been burned once, and no one wanted it to happen again. Ray, our maintenance guy, told me one afternoon while we were both checking the mail that he had known something was off, but had not felt comfortable speaking up. "I'm just the maintenance guy," he said. "I didn't think anyone would listen to me." "I listened," I told him. "Your information was crucial. Don't ever think your observations don't matter." He smiled at that. "Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you asked. This place runs a lot better now." He was right. The building did run better. The elevator worked. The finances were transparent. Board meetings were well attended and productive. It was not perfect, but it was functional and it was honest. I ran into one of the residents who had initially been hostile to my investigation, a man named Greg who lived on the 5th floor. He stopped me in the lobby one evening. "I owe you an apology," he said, looking uncomfortable. "I thought you were making a big deal out of nothing. I thought you were just someone who liked to complain. I was wrong." "No hard feelings," I said. "You didn't have all the information. None of us did. That was the problem. Still, I should have been more open to listening. I'm glad you kept pushing." Those small moments of reconciliation meant a lot. The building had been divided during the investigation, and it took time to rebuild the sense of community. But slowly, people started talking to each other again, attending social events and working together to improve the building. Mrs. Kowalski organized a building-wide barbecue that summer in the small courtyard behind the building. It was well attended, and people seemed genuinely happy to be there, not just coexisting but actually enjoying each other's company. I found myself talking with a young couple who had just moved in, explaining the history of what had happened with the HOA and how things had changed. They listened with wide eyes. "We almost didn't buy here because of the news coverage," the woman said, "but when we talked to current residents, everyone said the place had really turned around." "It has," I said. "Sometimes it takes a crisis to force necessary changes. This was our crisis, and we came out better for it." The legal proceedings finally concluded in November, nearly 9 months after Patricia's arrest. The final restitution payments were made, and the civil case was closed. We had recovered 82% of the stolen funds, which was considered a good outcome given that many fraud victims never recover anything. The new property management company we had hired proved to be professional and responsive. They provided detailed monthly reports, maintained proper records, and responded to homeowner inquiries promptly. It was night and day compared to how Patricia had operated. I also learned that we were not the only building Patricia had managed. She had been on the board of 2 other HOAs in the Portland area, though in smaller roles. Those associations were now conducting their own audits to ensure similar fraud had not occurred. As far as I knew, they did not find anything, but the fact that they were checking was a sign that people were taking these issues more seriously. The media coverage of the case sparked broader conversations about HOA oversight and accountability. Several state legislators introduced bills to strengthen HOA regulations and require more robust financial reporting and third-party audits. I was even invited to testify before a state legislative committee about my experience, which was intimidating but important. Sitting in the hearing room at the Oregon State Capitol in Salem, I explained how a lack of transparency and oversight had enabled fraud to continue for 18 months. I talked about the vulnerability of residents on fixed incomes who could not afford inflated fees and who depended on HOA services being properly provided. One legislator asked me what I thought was the most important reform needed. "Mandatory third-party audits," I said without hesitation. If our HOA had been required to have an independent auditor review the books annually, this fraud would have been caught much earlier. Patricia was able to operate unchecked because she controlled all the information. Independent oversight would prevent that. The committee members nodded, and several took notes. I did not know if anything would come of it, but I felt like I had done my part to try to prevent other people from going through what we had experienced. Back at Riverside Towers, life gradually returned to normal, though it was a new normal built on a foundation of accountability and transparency. The elevator continued to run smoothly with proper maintenance. Our HOA fees actually decreased slightly once we eliminated the fraudulent charges and negotiated better rates with legitimate contractors. Donald proved to be an excellent HOA president. He ran meetings efficiently, communicated clearly, and made sure everyone had access to the information they needed. Susan was meticulous as treasurer, tracking every dollar and providing detailed breakdowns of expenses. I found that serving on the board was more work than I had anticipated, but it was also satisfying. I understood how the building operated, where the money went, and what decisions were being made. I had a voice in those decisions, and so did every other homeowner. One evening in December, nearly a year after I had first noticed the billing discrepancy, I was sitting in my apartment looking out at the Portland skyline. The city lights twinkled in the winter darkness, and I could hear the faint sound of the elevator running smoothly in the shaft, carrying residents up and down without incident. My phone buzzed with an email from Mrs. Kowalski. The subject line was "Thank you." The email was brief. "Marcus, I was thinking today about how different things are now compared to a year ago. I feel safe in my home again. I feel like my voice matters. I feel like the people managing this building actually care about doing the right thing. None of that would have happened if you had not asked questions. Thank you for being the kind of person who does not just accept that things are the way they are. Thank you for demanding better. You made a real difference." I read the email twice, feeling a tightness in my chest that might have been emotion or might have been pride or might have been both. I had not set out to be a hero or a whistleblower. I had just wanted to understand why my HOA bill had increased so dramatically. But in asking that question, and in refusing to accept vague answers and delays, I had uncovered a fraud that had been stealing from my neighbors and me for 18 months. I had helped hold someone accountable who thought they were above accountability. And I had helped create a system that was more transparent, more honest, and more responsive to the people it was supposed to serve. That, I realized, was what mattered. Not the drama or the conflict or even the arrests and convictions, but the fact that things were better now than they had been. The system worked better. People were treated better. The building was managed better. I replied to Mrs. Kowalski's email with a simple message: "Thank you for your support throughout this. We did this together, all of us who refused to accept being taken advantage of. I'm proud of what we accomplished." And I was. I was proud of the residents who had supported the investigation despite pressure to stay quiet. I was proud of Donald and Susan for standing up to Patricia when it would have been easier to go along. I was proud of Ray for sharing what he knew even though he worried about retaliation. I was proud of Mrs. Kowalski for organizing residents and keeping morale up during the difficult months. Most of all, I was proud that we had proven that accountability was possible, that fraud could be exposed and punished, and that ordinary people asking reasonable questions could create meaningful change. The blank elevator maintenance logs had told the story. No documentation existed because no work had been done. The simplicity of that fraud, the audacity of it, still amazed me. Patricia had simply invoiced for services that were never performed, counting on residents to pay their bills without asking questions. Most people had. I had almost been one of them. If I had not noticed the dramatic fee increase, or if I had accepted Patricia's first dismissive response, the fraud would have continued. Patricia and Brian would have kept stealing, the elevator would have kept deteriorating, and residents would have kept paying for maintenance they never received. But I had noticed. I had asked. I had persisted, and that had made all the difference. In January, I received a letter from the Oregon Department of Justice thanking me for my cooperation in the investigation and commending me for my diligence in documenting the fraud. The letter noted that my detailed records and persistence had been instrumental in building the case against Patricia and Brian Henshaw. I framed the letter and hung it in my home office, not out of ego but as a reminder. A reminder that paying attention matters, that asking questions matters, that demanding accountability matters. The residents of Riverside Towers had learned that lesson too. We had learned it the hard way by being victims of fraud, but we had learned it thoroughly. Our HOA was now one of the most actively engaged and transparent associations in Portland. Other buildings sometimes reached out to ask how we structured our oversight and reporting. We were happy to share. The more HOAs that operated with transparency and accountability, the less opportunity there would be for people like Patricia Henshaw to exploit their positions. Life moved on. The seasons changed. Portland's rainy winter gave way to spring and then to summer. The building settled into its new rhythms, functional and honest. I still lived on the 7th floor. I still worked from home as a software engineer, but I was no longer just a resident who paid his HOA fees and minded his own business. I was someone who understood that community required participation, that trust required verification, and that good governance required vigilance. The elevator still ran every day, carrying residents up and down, doing the job it was designed to do. The difference now was that it was actually being maintained, actually being serviced, actually being kept safe and functional. And the service logs were no longer blank. They were detailed, thorough, and verified. Every inspection was documented. Every repair was recorded, every dollar spent was accounted for. That was how it should have been all along. That was how it was now, and that was worth fighting for. As I closed my laptop that evening and prepared for bed, I thought about the journey from that first moment of noticing the increased fee to where we were now. It had been stressful, confrontational, and sometimes frightening. There had been moments when I had wondered if it was worth the fight, if I should just let it go and avoid the conflict. But I had not let it go. I had followed the evidence, asked the questions, and demanded accountability. And in doing so, I had not only exposed a fraud, I had helped create something better. The Riverside Towers HOA was not perfect. No organization run by volunteers ever is. But it was honest, transparent, and accountable. The people who lived here had a voice, and that voice mattered. That was the real victory. Not the arrests or the restitution or the news coverage, but the knowledge that we had built something worth protecting and that we had the tools and the will to protect it. I turned off the lights and settled into bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the building around me. Somewhere, the elevator hummed as it carried someone home. The sound was steady, reliable, and well-maintained. Everything was as it should be, finally.